Good afternoon, Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times on Wednesday, October the 2nd. Well, the ACLU today issued a report that's a result of 2 years of study on judicial and justice system reform in Arkansas. The problems are twofold. The big problems are, one is a prison population that's too big. It's grown in Arkansas while it's been dropping in the United States, and there's a hugely disproportionate imprisonment rate between the races, 4 times as much for black people than for white people. The ACLU has a number of suggestions, including better data collection for one thing, a probation system that's geared more toward rehabilitation than punishment, that is by throwing people back in prison for technical violations, but particularly a huge reduction in the prison population, a reduction by half. Other studies show that in other states where they've reduced the prison population, the crime rate has actually gone down, partially, I presume, because of better efforts at rehabilitation and reintegrating people back into the community. In any event, it's food for thought. It'll take legislative approval and voter support for legislation to get some of these things done, but this is a step in that direction. The State Board of Education announced today that it will have a meeting next week, Thursday, October the 10th, on the Little Rock School District. By then, it'll have the final scores in hand on standardized test scores that mark the supposed success or failure of schools. And then they'll decide how to classify the schools under the framework they adopted last week for management of the school district going forward. You know the plan. This is the segregation plan crafted by the Hutchinson administration to keep poor schools in the hands of the state education department, but to let those succeeding schools, typically in higher income white neighborhoods, to more or less have democratic control, although not entirely. There's still an indication that the state will not give the school board full powers. Also on the agenda is a proposal to throw out the teachers union as a bargaining agent, and also to ignore state law. They call it waiving state law. It's the same thing, but they're allowed to do this, so that teachers would not have a strong say in the personnel policy committee that would deal with personnel issues in the district after the teachers union was gone. This is all about crushing the teachers union, crushing organized labor, and blaming teachers for problems that are more linked to poverty than the teachers' efforts. But that's the way the Hutchinson administration rolls. They're returning to the freedom of choice days of the 1950s and 60s. Call it segregation by race and class would be more accurate. State taxes, the monthly report came out today, and they still are increasing, mostly thanks to income taxes. Full employment helps that. The sales tax, which is something of a measure of the economy and consumer confidence, is pretty well flat, however. Huge drop. It's a small factor in overall revenue. And the gambling tax, thanks to the amendment that cut the gambling tax rate on Oaklawn and Southland casinos, about a 30% drop in September compared to the same month a year ago, even though their receipts were much higher. That's why they can afford to build big new hotels. Well, a Dallas jury is hearing information to mitigate or militate the sentence for Amber Guyger, the Dallas police officer who shot Bottom Jean, a St. Lucia native and a former Harding University student, who was killed in his own apartment by the police officer who burst in thinking a burglar was inside. She was in the wrong apartment. It wasn't her apartment after all. They're hearing testimony from his family and from her family. Her family saying she made a terrible mistake and feels terribly sorry, from his family saying they've suffered an incredible loss. Also hearing some testimony about the officer's background, which is not altogether flattering in terms of her views of race and some others, and policing. She's white. The victim in this case was black. Jason Rapert, we mentioned yesterday he lost a federal court ruling that said the suit should go forward over his blocking of people from his Facebook and Twitter accounts. He's a state senator. The judge says that looks like an impermissible restriction of the First Amendment. Rapert didn't disappoint. He had a long screed on Facebook later in the day yesterday complaining about this evil federal judge and the liberals that are ruining America. But of course, Rapert made some what is the phrase here? Made some shinola out of the mess, and he's raising money for his Holy Ghost ministries. Never miss a chance to stick your hand out for money, is the preacher's motto, and he's at it again. We'll see how well he does. Good article in Slate. You can find a link to it on arkansasblog.com about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. This is the Koch and corporate-funded interest group that plies state legislators with cookie-cutter legislation to enforce the corporate will and state legislators. They met in Austin in August, and they had a closed-door session, but a tape leaked out about how to gerrymander, treat it like a blood sport, they say, and don't tell the truth about what you're doing, expect to get sued, and they learn strategies to gerrymander and get away with it. There were some, 8 or 9 Arkansas legislators there, a murderer's row of the usual right-wing legislators, whether they were in the gerrymander meeting or not, can't say for sure, but they were down there getting indoctrinated, you can be sure, and we'll hear from them again in the next legislative session. Donald Trump has gone nuts. A pair of New York Times reporters have written a book about his border policy, disclosed that in addition to putting skin-piercing spikes on top of border walls, he's talked about literally getting a quote on building a moat full of alligators and snakes to discourage immigrants, and also talked about couldn't he shoot him in the leg at least to prevent him from coming in. He's gone nuts talking about this, dumping on the Washington Post, which had nothing to do with this book, but that's Trump these days. And the impeachment saga rolls on with Mike Pompeo got caught pretty much, if not lying, avoiding the truth for some time on the fact that he heard the damaging phone call between Trump and the leader of Ukraine. Resist. I'm Max Brantley. I'll be back tomorrow.